guide dogs.
Previously, on the journey of a guide dog, we found out how our guide dog puppies develop at 3 different stages of their puppy raising journey.
I mean, that's how lovely it is to be involved in it. You see the puppies growing, you get involved with the charity.
Oh gosh, it means a lot to us.
So now that the puppies have left the puppy raisers, that's when they'll come to our regional centre to start training to be guide dogs. We utilise positive reinforcement training. This means that it's science-based and relies on evidence. We want to get the best out of our dogs, so we want to make sure our training is ethical, efficient and effective. We have a standardised training programme known as STEP, which stands for Standardised Training for Excellent Partnerships. STEP is made up of 37 behaviours. So as part of that, there are the guiding task cues. So they're the verbal cues that we use with the dogs. And that includes the classic forward and also directional cues. It utilises marker training. So that means using a clicker, or a marker can also be verbal. And really a marker is just a signal to the dog that they've done the right behaviour. So at the start of their training, we'll really be focusing on things like settling. And so generally around about the first 4 weeks of the dog's training is around having a very calm, well-settled dog that's happy in the environment and that knows the handler very well. That also gives the handler lots of opportunity to really understand the dog as an individual, to know what reinforcement is most appropriate for that dog, and that's going to give them some valuable information for then introducing the guiding task. All of our dogs are individuals, and so we'll use a really wide array of different reinforcers. That's something that changes future behaviour, so it's more than just a reward to the dog. So as well as using food, there might be physical interaction, so praise and playing with the handler. It might be toys. It might simply be access to something nice that the dog wants to get to. Generally, the dogs will be brought into the centre in the morning by our fosterers. When they go out with the trainer to start off with, depending on the dog's stage of training. So they may be learning skills on site, so learning about the harness, the equipment they're going to be working with. It might be that they're learning routes, so off-site and walking around the streets. There's also a lot of generic training that the trainers are doing as well. So things like recall, so building up from what the puppy raisers have been doing with the dogs. Walking on a loose lead, for example, sits, downs, stands, those kind of things that really just help the dog to be comfortable and well behaved when they're out and about. So when we start with introducing the guiding task, we usually introduce equipment as one of the earlier tasks. So the equipment is a harness, and the way that we introduce it is the first step will be to show the dog the harness and then give the dog a biscuit. And really that starts this positive introduction to the harness, where we want the dog to see the harness and right from the word go start feeling happy about that. And we'll continue to shape that behaviour. So ultimately it will be a case of you hold the harness and the dog steps in. And it's really, really important that the dog right from the word go forms a really strong positive association with that equipment. We want the dogs to feel happy, and we want the dogs to be really engaged in putting their own head into the harness. We'll then start teaching the dogs how to walk from A to B. And so we teach the dogs how to give guiding tension. And really we want the dog to be applying a little bit of pressure into the front of the harness. And so by using a platform, we can really effectively teach that. We'd then start looking at training in routes. So we take them out and about. The curbs is a really, really big thing that we teach our dogs, so being able to target the down curb. So once we've got the dogs familiar on a route, we'll then start generalising the task work. Almost regardless of where the handler is, we want the dog to continue doing the guiding task. So when we talk about generalisation, we talk about the dog still being able to perform those same behaviours, but perhaps with a different handler, perhaps in a variety of areas. Or it might be that if the environment looks a bit different, we'll be introducing distractions, and we might start that in a familiar environment with platform to platform, where we're reinforcing the dog for doing what we want. and that's what they're going to get paid for, that little click that's going to come. It's really important that our guide dogs are going to be comfortable when they're travelling, and that doesn't just include travelling in cars, that also means public transport as well, so buses, trains, tubes, metros, sometimes even planes. Generally, if the dog is quite comfortable, then we'll allow them to explore, for example, like a stationary bus, or even going to a train platform and enabling the dog to explore a stationary train before we then introduce the dog to moving forms of transport. So the dogs have routine health checks throughout their training with us. They'll always have an entry check. Vets will observe their gait, check inside their ears, and they always have an ophthalmology check. So every single one of our dogs has their eyes tested. Another thing they might be doing is practicing cooperative care. We literally want to train the dogs to be an active participant in their day-to-day care. So we might be doing health checks with them, or we might be doing grooming. So that might look like using a chin rest. So the dog is taught to rest their chin either on a hand or on a chair. Another way that we might do it is using a bucket game, which is where the dog is trained to look at a bucket. And so whilst ever the dog is maintaining their eye gaze, it means that the dog is giving their consent to having husbandry done with them. When we introduce blindfold work, we always start with the tasks that the dog finds fairly easy. So perhaps putting their head into the harness, hand touches, the dog accessing curbs. So when we wear a blindfold, it means that the handler is not able to give additional cues. So it really relies on the dog understanding the behaviour with just the environment being the cue. So when the guide dogs are not training, they might be in the centre doing things like environmental enrichment. So that would include playing with interactive toys, perhaps wobblers, so things that dispense food, or snuffle mats so that they can forage, and that gives them an opportunity to express their natural behaviours. They might be playing in the green areas, or what we call free running, so the dog's being let off lead and to exercise, perhaps play with each other, to be able to sniff and run through the grass. It's really important that our dogs have downtime when they're here as well, so we want to be able to give them opportunity to sleep during the day. One of the reasons that's really important is because of something called latent learning. So after a dog has done some training, ideally we want them to be able to sleep, and that really helps to consolidate their learning. So when the dogs are not at the regional centre, they spend time with our volunteer fosterers, which means they can live in a really nice home environment and they can just be like dogs, really. So enjoy their downtime, perhaps live with other pet dogs in a family environment to really allow them to rest and come back to work feeling refreshed on a Monday morning.
Coming up next, meet our volunteer fosterers who provide temporary loving homes for our dogs in training whilst they embark on their journey to become guide dogs.